Ever feel like you're like going in circles with an argument? Or someone's using sneaky language to try and win a debate?
It's like they got these tricks up their sleeve, and you're left feeling like, wait, how'd that happen?
Exactly. Turns out those mental traps we fall into, they've been around for centuries, and luckily we've got an ancient guide to help us outsmart them.
That's the beauty of diving into Aristotle's Organon. It's
Yeah.
not just, dusty old philosophy.
Yeah, I was going to say, when I hear Aristotle, I think time to brush up on my ancient Greek.
Right. But this is different. It's surprisingly practical advice on how to think more clearly, how to construct really strong arguments, stuff that's still relevant today, even in our crazy fast-paced world.
So it's less about togas and more like a toolkit for better thinking.
Yeah.
Sign me up. Okay, but let's be real. This thing, the Organon, it's a beast. Where do we even begin?
Well, Aristotle, he was all about breaking things down systematically. One of the biggest contributions he made was this idea of the syllogism. Sounds intimidating, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
But it's actually pretty simple. It's basically a structured way to build an argument, almost like a formula.
Yeah.
And the cool thing is, if you start with accurate information and follow this structure, your conclusion is going to be true. No way around it.
So it's less about like winning an argument and more about making sure your argument is actually, well, sound.
Exactly.
I like it. Give me an example. I got to see this syllogism thing in action.
Okay, so a really classic one is this. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. See how each part connects to the next logically.
Yeah, okay, even I can follow that. And philosophy is not my forte, so that's saying something.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, but I gotta say, this syllogism thing, it does seem a bit rigid, you know? Like, was Aristotle the kind of guy you'd want to get stuck debating with at a dinner party?
Maybe not. He was really into logic and structure, like really into it. But it makes sense why he was so focused on this stuff.
I can imagine.
Because think about it. If you want to build a house that's going to last, you need a solid foundation, right? Syllogisms, they're kind of like that foundation for arguments. He even categorized them further into different figures, which just shows how systematic his approach was.
Okay, so he took his logic very seriously. But that makes sense. If you're going to create a whole system of thought, you got to be thorough. So we've got these syllogisms, these structured arguments as a way to make sure our reasoning is sound. What's next?
Well, building a good argument is important, but it's only half the battle, right? We also need to be able to spot the bad ones, the ones that just feel dot off, even if we can't quite put our finger on why. And that's where Aristotle's work on fallacies comes in.
Fallacies. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So imagine this. You're scrolling through social media, and you see a headline that just makes your blood boil.
Oh, I don't even have to imagine it happens to me every day.
Right. It's like they're designed to get a reaction out of us.
Yeah.
But Aristotle would say, before you hit that share button, take a breath and ask yourself, is this argument actually sound?
You're saying Aristotle had something to say about internet arguments 2,400 years ago. I am all ears.
He recognized that we as humans were susceptible to these flawed ways of thinking, these little traps.
Okay, yeah, I'll admit I fall for those clickbaity headlines sometimes.
Exactly. And he gave us this framework for identifying those flaws. He called them fallacies, these sneaky tricks of language and logic that can make a bad argument seem persuasive.
It's like they're disguised as good arguments, but underneath it's all just smoke and mirrors. So what's the ancient Greek equivalent of fake news? Give me some examples of these fallacies. I have a feeling I'm falling for them all the time.
Okay, so one that's super common, even today, is begging the question.
Begging the question, that sounds almost polite. Like, oh, if you don't mind, could you please provide some evidence for your claim?
Right. But it's actually not polite at all. It's when someone tries to prove their point by just restating it in a different way.
So instead of giving you actual evidence, they just keep saying the same thing over and over again, but louder.
Exactly. It's like, this policy is bad because it's just wrong. They haven't actually told you why it's bad, just stated their opinion as if it's a fact.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I've totally been on both sides of that kind of argument. Okay, begging the question. Got it. What other logical pitfalls did Aristotle warn us about?
Another one that's everywhere, especially online, is the ad hominem fallacy.
Ad hominem. Okay, that one definitely sounds Greek to me. Break it down.
So ad hominem, it's basically when you attack the person making the argument instead of addressing the argument itself.
Ah, so instead of debating the idea, you go after the person. Yeah, that's sadly familiar. Like, Don't listen to anything they say they're wearing socks with sandals.
Exactly. It's a way to discredit someone without actually engaging with their ideas.
Hmm.
It's easy to dismiss someone's argument if you can just write them off as, like, uninformed or biased, right?
But that doesn't mean their argument is wrong.
Exactly. And Aristotle's all about focusing on the logic, the evidence. He'd say, stay focused on the content of the argument, not who's saying it.
It's like judging a book by its cover, or maybe, in this case, judging an argument by its arguer. Okay, but focusing on the logic makes so much sense. So we've got syllogisms for building good arguments and fallacies to watch out for. What other tools did Aristotle give us to, like, sharpen our reasoning skills?
Well, he was really big on definitions. He believed that if you really want to understand something, you have to start with a clear, precise definition of what it is you're talking about.
Okay, that sounds pretty basic, but I can already see where this is going. How many times have we had arguments that boiled down to us just having different ideas of what a word really meant?
All the time.
Right.
And Aristotle would say those weren't just arguments about words, they were arguments about the very nature of the thing, like what it is. He argued that a good definition, it captures the essence of something, the thing that makes it what it is.
So it's not just semantics, it's about getting to the core of what we're actually trying to understand. I like it.
Exactly. And he really dives deep into this in the categories, which is another part of the Organon.
Oh yeah, the categories. I feel like we should have a whole other deep dive just on that.
I know, right? It's a lot. But basically, he tries to categorize all of human knowledge. He outlines these 10 fundamental categories, and it all starts with substance.
Substance, like the actual physical stuff.
Well, kind of. He uses substance to mean what something is at its most basic level. Like a tree is a tree, a rock is a rock. And then he branches out from there to other categories like quantity, quality, relation.
Hold on, so is he talking about feelings now? Like, oh, I'm feeling substantial today.
Not quite. He was definitely more about logic than feelings. He's talking about the different ways we could describe and categorize things in the world. And he even includes categories like action and affection.
Affection. Okay, now I know we're getting into feelings.
Not quite. By affection, he meant how things are acted upon or changed by outside forces.
Yeah.
Like if you heat up metal, that changes in affection. It's more about cause and effect than like emotions.
Okay, so back to the logic. But categorizing all of human knowledge, that sounds like a pretty ambitious project.
It was. He was a very ambitious thinker. But for Aristotle, it wasn't just about putting everything into these neat little boxes. It was about understanding how things relate to each other, how they fit into a larger framework.
So it's less about being right and more about understanding how everything connects.
Exactly. And this actually brings us to another important distinction. He makes the difference between simply knowing something and actually understanding why it's true.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break that down for me. What's the difference? Okay, so we've got these like different levels of knowing something, just having the facts, versus actually getting that deeper understanding of why they're true. How do we get to that deeper level, according to Aristotle?
So he had this whole process for it called demonstration. Basically, it's about building a chain of reasoning that leads you to a conclusion, but not just any conclusion. It has to be rock solid because it's based on stuff you already know is true.
So kind of like those syllogisms we were talking about earlier, but like on a bigger scale.
Exactly. It's about connecting the dots, but with a focus on starting with reliable information. And get this, he even distinguishes between two types of demonstration. Demonstration of the fact and demonstration of the reasoned fact.
Okay, hold on. I'm sensing a pattern here. Aristotle really loved his distinctions, didn't he?
He did. He was all about breaking things down systematically.
Yeah.
But it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
'Cause there's a difference between just like observing something and truly understanding why it is.
Okay, so what's the difference between those two demonstrations? Give me an example. You know I love examples.
Okay, so imagine this. You see smoke coming from behind a building, right? You might conclude there's a fire. And that would be a demonstration of the fact. You've observed evidence, the smoke, and it points to a conclusion. Fire.
Makes sense. I see smoke, I think fire, pretty straightforward. But where does the reasoned fact come in?
Okay, so the reasoned fact would involve understanding why there's smoke. Like maybe someone left a grill unattended, or maybe there's an electrical problem in the building. It's about digging deeper, understanding the cause and effect, and that takes your knowledge from just observation to actual insight, you know?
Oh, okay. I see what you mean. It's like the difference between reading a headline and then actually digging into the full article, getting the context, the different sides of the story.
Exactly. It's about going beyond the surface level. And Aristotle, he was all about that deeper understanding, especially when it comes to more complex issues. It's not enough to just have an opinion, he'd say. Understanding the why behind the what, that's what helps you develop stronger, more informed beliefs.
It's like he's giving us a blueprint, not just for like navigating world, but for actually understanding it on a deeper level. And honestly, with the way information is just thrown at us constantly these days, having these tools, these strategies for thinking critically and not just accepting everything at face value, it's more important than ever.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's where his emphasis on questioning assumptions comes in. Don't just blindly accept what you're told, he'd say. Dig deeper. Look for the underlying causes, the principles at play.
Be an active participant in what you believe, not just a passive consumer of information, which, let's be real, is way harder than it sounds. But knowing that these tools exist, these ancient but still totally relevant strategies for thinking clearly and avoiding those logical fallacies,
Yeah.
it's empowering, you know?
It really is. It reminds us that even though the way we communicate and consume information has changed so much over the centuries, the fundamentals of clear critical thinking, they're timeless.
Totally. So next time we're scrolling through our feeds and see a headline that makes us want to scream, or we're stuck in a debate that feels like it's going nowhere, we can channel our inner Aristotle, right?
Hmm?
Question those assumptions, watch out for those sneaky fallacies, and always try to dig a little deeper, find that reasoned fact.
Exactly. Don't just scroll through life, think your way through it.
Love it. I think that's a perfect note to end on. Aristotle's Organon, a toolkit for better thinking that's just as relevant today as it was thousands of years ago.